Netflix has released their new batch of spooky Halloween-time shows, and among them lies the Cabinet of Curiosities, a horror anthology show sort of in a similar vein as The Twilight Zone, but with less of a focus on the morals of a story and more honed in on the horror aspects. Somehow I found this show like 3 minutes after the first episode was posted, and I watched every new set of episodes as they came out. Since it's that time of year, I decided to push back the projects I was working on and do my best to make this a ranking of every episode in the show. This is of course just my opinion, and works like these are very open to personal interpretation, and I will be assuming that you've seen the show, so spoilers ahead. Now let's get on with it, shall we? Number 8. The Viewing. The story of an eccentric billionaire gathering 4 experts of 4 different fields to have them come look at some cool shit he has. This episode's got some pretty weird vibes. I mean, at first it's pretty compelling as the characters are brought together under mysterious circumstances, taken to a sketchy room with an AK on the wall, borderline interrogated by this rich stranger about their lives, their worries, all of that. But where it loses me is the interrogation takes a backseat to them just discussing normal shit for like 40 minutes. I'm not joking, they sit around a table taking every drug under the sun and talk about random shit for like 70% of the episode, despite the fact they've all been summoned mysteriously by this stranger. There isn't even like a feeling that it's an uncomfortable situation, or that they're even remotely afraid of why they're there. After they're all sufficiently high and bored of talking about nonsense, the billionaire shows them some rock and asks them what they think about it. The rock is very strange, it's immune to all scientific reason and tests, but eventually it breaks open, and it's an alien, obviously. Eric Andre and the science girl escape, and the alien fuses with the billionaire, and the episode ends on a shot of the new alien hybrid thing loose on the city. This episode had a ton of potential, and I think they really squandered it when they dragged out the midsection the way they did. It really didn't leave the climax enough breathing room. The ending was pretty much just loud noises with bright lights and a really fast sports car driving down the road. Not much of an alien monster type energy. Maybe the message of this one went over my head, but I think it was just fine. Number 7. The Outside. The story of a girl who is ugly and desperate to do anything to fix it. So I gotta admit that I don't think this one had me even from the get-go, and I think it's one of the longer episodes too. Our heroine, a weird outcast by her peers at the bank, gets invited to a Christmas party, and she brings a taxidermized duck as a present, which probably has more to do with her social standing than her looks. While she's there, she gets some infomercial cream as a present, which burns the shit out of her face. Later that night, the very same infomercial speaks to her directly, which is obviously the start of a mental breakdown, a hallucination. Then there's like half an hour of her using the cream and it fucking her up even harder, and her outstanding husband trying to talk some sense into her. Then a little bit later, she talks to the infomercial again and buys $5,600 worth of the cream, which becomes like a cream monster or something in her basement, and then she makes out with it and kills her husband. Afterwards, she learns how to do her makeup and she cuts her hair, and her coworkers think she's hot. The episode ends on possibly the weirdest note I've ever seen in a show like this. It's like a weird filter over her making active listening faces at the camera for like a minute and a half. I understand the idea. Being outcast is one of the most shitty feelings someone can have, and I also get the message too. Something along the lines of, don't forego who you are in search of being someone else, or you'll lose yourself along the way. I mean, the ending doesn't really give off the impression that she's very unhappy though, so the whole thing feels silly. I don't know. Not the biggest fan of this one, but even then it's still at least okay. Number 6. Lot 36. The story of a man in debt who buys a storage locker that holds some weird demonic shit. It also has Nazi shit, but the demon shit is the important shit. As the first episode to introduce the series, it's a pretty powerful opener. Our main character is a no-nonsense kind of guy. He's selfish and arrogant, but he has a bit of pain inside that he's covering up. What I like about the way this character was handled is that in stories like these, you tend to know that bad people will be punished and good people will be rewarded. It's a classic Twilight Zone setup, but he teeters on the line. You can't be too sure if he's truly a bad person or someone just down on their luck. Now, it's not really clear how much debt this guy is in, but the occult stuff he finds in the locker, including a ritual table and some ancient Latin tomes, are apparently valued at $300,000, which, accounting for inflation in modern day, is near enough $1.5 million. Unfortunately, the most rare tome is missing, and without it the set won't sell for nearly that price. So obviously, it makes sense that he would be desperate enough to delve into the strange catacombs that are somehow hidden in the missing 30 square feet of the storage locker. Although this story is pretty compelling, I did find the pacing to be a bit skewed. We get a lot of time of build-up of what this dude's life is like, and a fair bit of him dealing with the occult objects and their would-be buyer. But the actual horror climax, the weird eldritch lady, she's only on screen for like 30 seconds, and the entire demonic segment is less than 10% of the runtime. Also, I get that he's no nonsense and really wants that money, but when he walks in a room and sees a woman in a weird salt circle type thing, and a massive void where her face should be, I highly doubt that he'd haphazardly walk in to get the book, especially after the occult expert explicitly warns him not to. It's a really good episode. It's not my favorite, but it's definitely up there. Number 5. Pickman's Model. The story of a guy who paints bird box paintings that make you crazy if you look at them. Our hero is not the aforementioned painter, but a colleague who sees the demented works and is driven mad for years as a consequence of seeing them. As a young artist, our lead William meets Pickman, who draws a bunch of weird edgy shit, and I guess art didn't overlap with horror a lot back then because it freaks him the fuck out. He starts seeing witches and ghouls and shit, and it eats him up. Eventually we get a time skip and he's an executive of a gallery or something, and Pickman shows back up, now a successful artist. Pickman, thinking he's homies with William, tries to show him his new shit back home, but William isn't having it and shoots him in the chest. Pickman reveals that all of his art is based off real demons and actual imagery that he's seen. Our hero burns all the maddening work and escapes, but somehow the art survives and makes its way into the gallery, where his wife sees it and is driven insane and carves her eyes out and cooks their son. Now, there's a bit of a weird gray area with this story. On one hand, I like the idea. I mean, people being driven mad by evil material is a story as old as time, and just because it's in painting format doesn't take away from that for me. On the other hand, I like the prospect of the art simply being disturbing and William being driven mad by his own issues and blaming Pickman for it. The revelation that the art truly had some evil power, one that his wife fell victim to almost immediately, while William wasn't driven insane for years, kinda sullies that. What's interesting in the ending is that Pickman's art not only showed real monsters to whom he was acquainted, but also visions of the future. This is evident with the painting of the wife and the child's head at the end. It's a decent episode. I liked it about as much as I liked Bird Box, which is to say it's pretty decent. Not magnificent, but decent. Number 4. Dreams in the Witch House. The story of a man who saw his twin sister's ghost and dedicated his life to seeing her again. This is the one with Rupert Grint, so I'm gonna try my hardest not to make a Harry Potter joke somewhere in here. At a young age, Walt lost his sister and his spirit showed up and got dragged off into a forest. Ever since then, he's done everything in his power to find where she was taken. After messing around with hoax spiritualists for a while, eventually someone introduced him to some sort of wonder drug that allows him to teleport to purgatory, where he does meet up with his sister. Obviously, he gets pretty addicted to the stuff and tries to find a way to pull her back into the real world, which he can because they're twins or something. Unfortunately for him, some witch and also a rat thing with a human head want to use him to save themselves against his will. As it turns out, saving his sister is only possible if he himself dies, and I guess any other ghost that kills him also takes the free life from him. And the witch is really trying to get that free life. His sister comes to his rescue, killing the witch's ghost, but she chooses to move on and allow her brother to live. Afterward, he's recovering in bed with the witch dead. All is well again. Psych, gotcha! Peter Pettigrew busts out of his chest to finally take revenge for having to be disguised as his pet for all those years. Fuck. God damn it, I was so close. Then the rat thing possesses his body or something, and that's the end of the story. It's a fairly standard story, feels pretty predictable until the surprise chest explosion at the end. Not that that's a bad thing. I mean, what lengths would you go to speak to a lost loved one more time? I think the episode is pretty middle of the road, but it does its job telling the story. Number 3. Graveyard Rats. This one is about rats. Graveyard rats. What did you expect? It's right there in the name. More accurately, this one tells the story of a man who robs the dead in his own cemetery to pay off a gambling debt. Unfortunately for him, his graveyard is infested with rats that live underground and operate as a hive mind to kidnap bodies before he can rob them. When a particularly wealthy corpse goes missing the same day it's buried, our hero follows the rats into their complex tunnels, and what ensues is probably the worst night any character has ever had in any story ever. Almost everything that can go wrong for this dude does. I'm talking being poked in the eye by random tree roots, the tunnel collapsing on him, literally shooting himself in the foot, finding an ROUS, stumbling upon a lost Cthulhu temple that is guarded by a zombie, and even the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel of his escape being the inside of a very shiny coffin. This one's pretty damn good. I mean, you have to suspend your disbelief almost entirely as it's cartoonish in its idea, but the execution sells it just fine. This does follow the formula of having a bad person punished, but it also does it in such an over-the-top and continuous manner that you almost want him to escape at the end. The Lovecraftian influence is all over this one, and it's one of my favorites for its simplicity. Number 2. The Murmuring. The story of a married couple who watch birds professionally in a haunted house. Pretty simple setup here. Wife and husband, both fascinated by birds, go away on a trip to watch birds do that cool thing where they all fly in unison to make shapes and whatnot. While there, the wife has some paranormal experience and the husband does not. The birds are meant to represent the original homeowner and the current wife's mental freedom, having lost her infant daughter recently and never coming to terms with it. Over the course of the episode, the story flip-flops between two major segments. The couple studying the birds during the day, and the wife unable to sleep being haunted during the night. That makes the moment where these two segments bleed together and she encounters the ghost while at work even more frightening near the end, as the viewer has been conditioned to feel safe in those moments. The haunting starts fairly early in the episode, but not much is on screen for very long, and there isn't any jump scares or anything till way later. It adds the sense that something is going to happen, but they let it stew for long enough to get you on the edge of your seat. When it comes to raw scariness, I found this one to be the most unsettling. Maybe I'm just extra scared of paranormal stuff, but the cut to the shadowed little boy standing next to the bed made me unironically feel like I needed to turn the lights on, and even the jump scares of the ghost mom scared the shit out of me. The climax of the episode, where we get to piece together that the ghost screams were actually at herself, the mother having gone temporarily insane due to isolation and drowning her son, adds a layer of deep melancholy over everything. But thankfully, this experience allows our couple who's currently alive to confront the death of their own child that's been holding them down for a year. I really liked this one. It felt like proper horror, and it didn't need to rely on music buildups or cheap psychological tactics to force a scare out of me. I was genuinely unsettled almost the whole ride, and it's very, very close to my favorite episode. However, there is one episode that I like just a little bit more, and that's because of the originality factor. A haunted house with ghosts that parallel the protagonist isn't entirely an original story, even if the protagonists in this case do watch birds for a living. Number 1. The Autopsy. The story of a man confronted with a body-snatching alien in a one-on-one conversation. This is brilliance. The setup is pretty simple. A coroner is tasked with investigating bodies that died in a mysterious explosion due to an unidentifiable object in a mine shaft. The coroner is also terminally ill with stomach cancer, and he's doing this as a favor for his good friend. We get some pretty gruesome scenes of the autopsy at first, but the findings indicate almost no signs of an explosion. However, mysteriously, the bodies have been drained entirely of blood. Eventually, the perpetrator of the explosion, or his corpse at least, shambles out, and that's when the beauty begins. The body explains that it is a traveler from another world, one that feeds on humans. Their blood? Also cancer. It eats people in general, that's the point. And it hops from host to host. A classic body snatcher situation. But the twist of the narrative and what pushes this episode above and beyond is this. Typical body snatcher movies tend to focus on those who are close to the victims. The people are body snatched and you get this vibe that nobody can be trusted. But here, the alien itself is talking to the would-be victim, explaining his plan to use his body to feast on corpses infinitely, corrupt the planet, etc., etc. The long, drawn-out battle of the minds between the man and the alien is incredibly compelling. Along the ride, we learn that the alien has done away with all evolutionary traits that its host provides, like eyesight, hearing, basically all senses. In desperation, when he's about to have his body stolen, the coroner uses his last moments of freedom to destroy his eyes, destroy his ears, slice his own throat to effectively make his body non-functional, and leave a message for his body to be destroyed. This is a story of monumental self-sacrifice. A man who is not only ready to end his life to save the world, but unmake himself, putting himself through grueling self-mutilation to thwart the alien. And when the alien does take his body, they have a conversation within his subconscious, and he takes great pleasure knowing that he put a stop to this. The Autopsy is the best of the best. It's my favorite episode, and it's one that took a conventional trope and flipped it in a new and interesting way with a fresh perspective. Sometimes that's all that's needed for an entirely original idea. There you have it. My ranking for every episode from Cabinet. I think this show is one of the best horror anthologies in a long time. Much better than the newest version of The Twilight Zone, that much is for sure. What did you think about the episodes? In a show like this, each episode is entirely up to how the viewer takes it, so your rankings could be wildly different from mine. Leave me a comment with what episode was your personal favorite. Thanks for watching and have a very happy Halloween.